Welcome to Series 43, everyone. Sincere apologies for how late this is coming out. I had some surgery this week, and Ryan is in the middle of selling his house and packing up to move into a different house. We always try our best to get everything out on time, but sometimes life is just life. So on that note, I want to be upfront. Please note that it may continue this way just for a couple weeks as Ryan navigates his home sale/move, and I have surgery on my other hand later this month. So, we're going to do our best, obviously, to get everything out to you on time, but sometimes, it is what it is. We take making this show really seriously, just the making it part, not obviously anything we do on the show, but making it. We are also just people, with houses and wrists, so your patience is appreciated. Announcements. It is officially International Podcast Month. Ryan usually has a ton of stuff to say about that, and about all of the great shows that'll be out this month, but he did not give me any specific notes about it. So, you get what you get, which is, unfortunately, life kept me too frazzled to really participate, but I know that there are a ton of amazing folks who worked on projects for this month. You can go to internationalpodcastmonth.com or @podmonth on Twitter to learn more. Their pinned tweet right now has links to all the different places that you can find episodes. We can put a link to that in the show notes, and to the website, so you can find everything there. There's not a lot else to tell you right now, but you can hear more of my lovely voice after the episode when I do our call to action. For now, please enjoy this episode and this series, which I think might have reached the ultimate Ryan and Amelia energy. So, enjoy!
Welcome to Character Creation Cast, a show where we discuss and create characters, the best part of role-playing games, with guests using their favorite systems. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan, and this episode, my co-host Amelia and I are excited to welcome Cam Banks, designer of the game we are covering this series, Cortex Prime, a modular RPG toolkit.
Cam, welcome to Character Creation Cast. We are very excited that you are joining us today.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, about the projects that you're working on, and where people can find you online?
Yep, I am a New Zealand game designer. I did live in the United States for 22 years, so I have stuck myself with the accent of a hybrid New Zealander and American. So no one believes me anymore where I'm from. I just sound like this. So you can find me online on Twitter at BoyMonster and on Instagram at RustySellsword. I'm also on numerous Discords and other websites showing up to annoy people about Cortex Prime whenever I can. My current project where we're developing at Fandom Tabletop is Tales of Xadia, the Dragon Prince role-playing game, which we're all very excited by. Upcoming projects include the Legends of Grayskull Masters of the Universe role-playing game, and other things we can't talk about yet.
Secrets.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
That's a lot of cool stuff as it is, though.
Yeah,
I know, right?
It keeps me busy. That's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
It's like not a small list of things to work on.
Well, let's go ahead and get into this, and we'll start by discussing what this game is all about.
What's in a game?
Usually we ask what sort of setting the game uses. Obviously, Cortex Prime does not use a setting, or at least not start out with one. So it's a bit different. Can you give us the elevator pitch for this game?
Yeah, I sure can. I had to think about this when I was working on it. So what I came up with was that it's a truly multi-genre modular role-playing toolkit system, which sounds like a lot of words for a big box of Lego that you can throw together and make RPGs out of.
That's awesome. Well, what sort of tools then do we need to actually play this game or create characters in this game?
Well, to play the game, you're going to need a lot of dice, so many dice, all the dice. You can take any dice you have and throw the D20s out because we don't use those.
Oh, wonderful.
So most of the dice, actually, not all of them.
Most of the dice.
D20s have had their time.
It's true.
You're over now.
Many other games use D20s, and we love them, and that is fine.
Mm-hmm.
You also will need some plot point tokens. These can be coins or beads, or I've often used poker chips, other kinds of things. These are to track your plot points, which are like bennies or fate points or anything else you've probably seen in other games. And highly recommend something to keep notes on for sure. We actually at Fandom Tabletop have been trying to develop these games as simultaneous launch digital and analog. So everything that we come out with is going to have online tools as well as the standard physical books that you'll find in stores and other places.
Oh, very nice.
That's really nice because I know increasingly, well, I shouldn't say increasingly, almost entirely in the last 4-ish years, I have only played online other than at conventions. And then obviously in the last 2 years, only online because nobody goes anywhere anymore. And it's frustrating because there are a lot of games that are very specifically like, you have to be here in person to do all of this passing of the things. And, you know, like, while I think that those are really cool mechanics, most of my friends live far away. So even if COVID was not a thing, those are people that I only see like twice a year. So I want the ability to be able to play online and do those things with people that I love that are far away.
Yeah. And it's nice that you make it easier. When I got the book, the digital version, I was surprised to see the web page interface for the book. And I thought it was fantastic to be able to have all the hyperlinks and everything there and to be able to navigate the book through a web interface, which I don't think I've seen before outside of maybe like Roll20 with
I was going to say, I think
Burn
the compendium for Burn Bright, but even that isn't like the same kind of searchable thing that this is with the downloads like in the book and everything too, which is really nice.
Yeah, so that was really cool to see.
Yeah, there's also like people who want to, if they have only limited online ability, like if they can't be constantly looking through things on their phone or a laptop with a Wi-Fi, you can download the PDF from that site too if you've already got the book. So there's multiple ways for you to access it. That was a huge part of what we wanted to do going into it before launch. You know, we did not want anyone to have a problem interacting with the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do think that that's nice that it's both online and like in a PDF though, because I know there are times where like trying to pull a PDF up on my phone and like sit there and scroll through it and everything is really difficult, whereas a web page is almost easier sometimes. So it was nice to have both.
Absolutely.
So Cortex Prime is a game, but it's also a toolkit for making your own game. We have noticed in a lot of cases that games, despite being quote unquote generic, they're still designed to tell certain kinds of stories, or they work best on certain kinds of stories. Do you think that there are certain stories that Cortex Prime is best at?
Yeah, I do actually. I think although you can bring a lot of tropes from various kinds of genres to it, one of the things that does tend to happen with Cortex Prime games is that they are very, I would say the word cinematic is often used a lot, but I think that inspired by media is a better way of doing it. So they resemble or they kind of feel like you're on a TV show, you're part of a movie sort of style universe, or even visual media like comic books, which we do with Marvel Heroic. The emphasis is always on capturing that feeling of being in a media franchise of some kind, right? So a lot of the words and terms we use, like scenes and and beats and so forth have their origin in film, TV, other kinds of media. I mean, you can have pretty gritty, dry, dark sorts of games with Cortex Prime, as well as lighthearted, humorous ones. But they're all going to feel a little bit more like we're adapting media as opposed to being like a war game with miniatures and things, which I think is a different aspect.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I did notice in looking at like what the system has been used for in the past in like older versions. And then, of course, even in the things that you mentioned, that they are all like movie and TV property adaptations for a lot of the games that are kind of using this system as the base. So it seems like it works pretty well for that.
Tends to be what licenses are, though, honestly. If you go out to seek a license, it's going to be from a movie or TV or books or something. So, yeah, that absolutely fit into the creation of Cortex Prime as it is now. So it does show a lot of the signs of its earlier editions.
Absolutely. So what makes Cortex Prime unique from other generic games or toolkits that are kind of out there?
I think the big difference is that Cortex Prime has scaffolding in place to remove almost every kind of stat or trait or even rules procedure and replace it with something else, while still remaining at the very heart of it, a dice pool game with dice as traits. So there's a lot of that. You can tell it's Cortex Prime because of the way that we do things with plot points and so on, but you can mod so much more in this game than you can in other so-called generic games, because those at least have, a much more detailed or robust heart to it, where I'm of the sort of mindset that I can throw a lot of that out. I don't really need that. And that makes things a little bit different. You only have to look back at certain adaptations of things before to see that in some cases you couldn't really play a character from one Cortex game in another Cortex game, even though it may feel similar, because all the rules were used in different ways. So yeah, I think that makes it a lot different. It really is much more of a toolkit than it is let's take these rules and make it work for this thing, which I think is even like the OGL and D20 and so on. It always felt like D&D, even though you're playing in Farscape or whatever.
Oh, right.
That is a pet peeve that I have. I could talk about that for like hours and hours and hours. Not everything fits into D&D. Okay.
That's true.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of this game, because this isn't Cortex, it's Cortex Prime. There already was a Cortex and a Cortex Plus.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about like where Cortex Prime came from and how it came to be what it is now?
Well, I think that we can call everything Cortex to make it easier. But Cortex Prime, well, I mean, that's why I've had to try to get this down to the point where people don't have to use multiple different terms for things, because it gets confusing. Cortex Prime is the current state of the system and the toolkit, and that's the book and everything else. But if you build something from it, it will be a Cortex game, if that makes sense. So, yeah. Cortex came originally from, it predates even the thing that it came from. There was a game called Sovereign Stone that was put out by Sovereign Press back in the 90s. And it was a fantasy world that was created by Tracy Hickman, Margaret Weiss, Larry Elmore, Don Perrin, and a few other folks, Lester Smith. They made a world that was fantasy and it was different, and then they used a system that had never been used before, which was all of the stats were rated with dice from D4s or even D2s, all the way up to D20s, even in that case. And that kind of worked out okay. But when the D20 system came along, they converted the whole thing over to D&D, and it became its own thing. It's just another D&D setting. In the meantime, Margaret's company decided that it wanted to license Serenity, the movie, not Firefly, the TV show. It's a very complicated difference in licenses there.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
So Serenity, the movie, was licensed, and that was for that. Jamie Chambers created the Cortex rules for that. They didn't call them Cortex at the time because it was just the rules for Serenity. And a lot of us worked on that. I was at the time mostly focused on Dragonlance while working at Margaret's company, but soon after we started branching out to other things. We did Battlestar Galactica and we got Supernatural, and I had more of a role in those as things went on until I was lead developer and lead designer for Margaret Weiss Productions on all the games. I think at the point when we acquired Smallville and Smallville and Leverage, I decided that I wanted to change it from being Cortex, which was more or less like it is in Serenity and Battlestar Galactica, very much kind of a sort of like a cinematic unisystem, Savage Worlds kind of standard game with, the way it played, to just break it down into little bits and rebuild it for both those properties. So for Smallville, it was radically different. It had relationships and values as stats. It was very strange and dramatic and extremely focused on your play group being potentially not only the heroes but also the villains, and you'll all work together and so on, because it was based on a CW TV show. And then for Leverage, I did the same thing, but I rebuilt it up for a heist kind of genre, the TV show Leverage. John Rogers and those folks at Electric Entertainment really loved that show and that sort of feel of a kind of quick, high action, very simple kind of game, but it still used Cortex for that too. So that version of the system that I was using was called Cortex Plus, where a lot of the things from Cortex, the previous one, the classic Cortex, we tossed out. We didn't use D2s anymore. We didn't add up all the dice. We just added the 2 dice. And there are other things that came out of it that you see now in Cortex Prime that didn't actually exist prior to that. So, yeah. And then after that, a few more games. Marvel Heroic was my dream job. I loved working on that property. It was amazing for the year and a half that we were publishing. And then there was a bit of a period of time where there was Firefly. We finally got the license for Firefly, but not the license for Serenity. So again, and that was the last game that was published by Margaret Weiss Productions. After that, Margaret licensed out the whole shebang, all the rules and everything else to me, minus any license property, to create Cortex Prime. And I kickstarted that 2017. I took forever to put it out, and in the meantime I moved back to New Zealand, so that was even more interesting. But Fandom bought all of Cortex from Margaret, and they brought me on board as a creative director, and then we put the game out last year, and it was only uphill from there. Wonderful, amazing track success for Cortex.
Oh, very nice. So was the jump from all those different type of genres and different gameplay styles, but using the same base system, kind of the inspiration to go into Cortex Prime as like a full toolkit?
Yeah, actually, people, even back in the classic days, we put out a book called the Cortex Prime rule system or something. It was more or less the system as it was at the time, with the license stripped out and some conversations about how to make your own characters and things. But it was still, you still use all the same stats, you still had the same skill list and so on. It wasn't like they had done much more than just take the license off it. People were asking and hacking and modding the Cortex Plus games for their own stuff. They were running Glee with Smallville, for example, or they were doing DC Comics for Marvel Heroic. Yeah, that was a huge, weirder thing for me to see that being run at a convention. So, but that was the kind of inspiration for then. We put out a book called the Cortex Plus Hacker's Guide, which was just full of little hacks that people had come up with and mini settings and things. And when I got the license to do something with the rules after that, I thought I really want to bring everything together, not just all the Plus games and all the rules and things, but also even the classic stuff, and kind of create this Uber version of it. And that's why I called it Cortex Prime. It's the Prime version of all of the stuff we've done. And in the process, had to iron out a lot of wrinkles and get a lot of help from my amazing editor, Amanda Valentine, to make it all coherent. And and the book itself, now that it's been put out by Fandom, is absolutely gorgeous. I think the art direction from Tina Lamb-Collier is next level. And we got a lot of amazing artists to make the whole book look really cool. Makes it easier to read, and not just a big dry textbook.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an absolutely beautiful book.
Absolutely.
I think you got, well, I know for a fact that you got many Annie nominations for the art too.
Yeah. Well, it was a huge thrill the other day. Yeah, that's right. We got 6 nominations for the book and 1 for the Tales of Xadia Primer, which isn't even the game yet. So I'm just looking forward to seeing how that plays out later.
Yeah, no, I know my kids are begging me to run that one because we just finished watching all of Dragon Prince. So I'm going to have to, get good at it and try and run it for them. I want to ask, though, what kind of things did you have to think about in changing, because Cortex has been a system for so long, when you finally sat down to do it as Cortex Prime, as its own thing.
Yeah.
What kind of updates and changes did you have to make just to kind of, I don't want to say comply isn't really the right word, but to stay in step with the things that have changed in the RPG community in that many years? Because, we've moved away significantly in a lot of places from a D20 system, and
right.
just the kinds of games that we want are very different.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I'm always heavily influenced by, especially the indie and small press publishing scene. I think that people come up with some amazing ideas. A lot of the stuff that's in Cortex Plus that's now in Prime, and the stuff that is in Prime now that wasn't even in there before, is inspiration. And I think we all do this as designers. I mean, there's folks who have been inspired by the work I've done in the past. I've been inspired by work people have done in the past. We have that kind of collegial atmosphere, I think, that goes on as long as you understand that none of us are trying to rip anyone else off, and it's kind of like a homage, love letter, sort of inspiring thing. Then the feel is really good. And you still have to write this stuff. You can't just copy and paste things straight into your book, otherwise it's pretty obvious. But
yeah.
That's part of my feel of this, is that I wanted to create a kind of an avenue for people to bring their own content into Cortex, and that was a huge deal because the DIY and sort of small press indie publishers really want to do things with their own ideas, and sometimes they don't have the time or the interest in coming up with their own rule systems from scratch. I think that's why you see so many people using D&D, even the old basic set stuff and things. It's just what they know. It's easy for them to do it. And then they can go put out some wacky module, or they can make a sort of a cool ass setting that's based on something with the serial numbers filed off. And that's cool. Mm-hmm. And that was what I kind of wanted Cortex Prime to be. Kind of like the lingua franca, I guess, for a new bunch of people doing things their own way, while also adding back into the community. So if they make something cool, they can throw it into the Cortex Creator Studio, which is a thing we have planned. And then although they will keep all of their own IP and their setting, and it's all theirs, anything that's rules-wise that they make, they can contribute to the greater community, who can then use that in their own stuff. So almost at the inverse of a license. It's you keep all the stuff that's actually fiction and a narrative that's yours, and you can continue to make it yours, while, hey, I just use this cool Lego brick. I want you to have this Lego brick. Why don't you play with it?
Right.
That's very cool.
Well, I know that, on the One Shot Network, the Courier's Call podcast just switched to be using Cortex Prime for their system. They were using a version of Fate Accelerated last season, and they just switched to use Cortex this season because they felt like it had a little bit more of those building blocks for them to work with. So, it's only a couple episodes so far, but I'm excited to see how it works for them compared to using something else. So I'm very excited.
And it's worth noting too, I think that I go way back with a lot of these people. I mean, I was a part of the same kind of small community of folks that included Fred Hicks and Rob Donahue and those folks who worked on Fate, and we're all old friends. And the reason some things look similar, I think, in the long run is, A, they also worked on some of the games I made back in the Cortex Plus days, so you'll see them in leverage. The same way Josh Roby worked on Smallville, and they've done some things in this since then that draw on the same ideas that Smallville had. I think the key to that is that we think similarly about games. We love the things about games that we all have in common, and so you'll see a lot of that come out. I think that's a thing that's quite common. I think if you have communities who are sort of bashing ideas and throwing things around, you'll see similar ideas come out of them. And that's what I think is wonderful about game design in general.
Yeah, I think that there's, there are certain like concepts that we all kind of grab from. But like if the three of us sat down and played a game and then went to each go make our own game, what we pulled from that original one would be different. Based on like what we want our own games to do. So I think that, a lot of us pull from that same sort of like pile of concepts. We just take away different things. And so you can kind of see where stuff starts to branch off and become its own thing. But like we're all still working in that same, like that same bucket of Lego pieces. We've just grabbed different ones, know. But yeah, you can see where a lot of things, it's cool to watch the evolution of games because you can see where those things came from. And it's just fun to watch people make new things out of them all the time.
Absolutely. So this is the part that we talk about, like basic terms and concepts usually for the games that we need to kind of understand before we get into character creation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pieces to Cortex, right?
It's quite a lot. Yes.
So we put down a preliminary list of things that we could talk about, but I think I just want to ask you in general, like, is there anything that's just different that we might need to know before we dive into mashing together our own system and then creating characters? Or is it something that we can kind of get a hold of as we go through the process?
I think you'll get things as they go along. I mean, the most intimidating thing about this book probably is looking at it and going, well, which things do I pick to go into my game? Do I pick all of them? And if I do, what will that look like? And the answer is a mess.
Don't do that.
I like to tell people sometimes there's two ways of doing this: go completely hog wild and crazy, and then chop off the bits that don't work anymore, or start with the familiar and the comfortable and add things on that may be, interesting to you. And the latter is most likely the way that most people should go. Although if you're anything like my wife, who just goes completely out to the fringe land of weirdness first and then comes slowly back, that's just what she does. I think that a basic term or concept we want to sort of really nail down first is this idea of traits. And they are what every other game would call ability scores or stats or feats or anything. It's anything that in the game that is rated with a die. And the dice go from D4 to D12. And the important thing about the rating is that it doesn't always reflect strength or potency or effectiveness necessarily, but how important or significant that trait is compared to other traits like it. So if I have a D12 in something, not only am I probably better in that thing or stronger or faster or whatever, but I'm also more likely to be using it because it's my signature aspect of my character. It's my spotlight, I guess you could call it. So high die ratings mean they will be more useful for me to succeed in the game, but they're also where the camera is most focused on me. And the D4s are going to be the areas which I'm going to have a lot of trouble. And I think either my character doesn't care about them as much, or they're deliberately low because I want to get in trouble with them. And because of the way the system works, as you'll probably find out, rolling ones on your dice bring you problems, like they bring you complications or other kinds of things. But they also give you plot points to spend later on. So you kind of don't want to always be using your best dice because you want to earn plot points to succeed later at doing awesome stuff.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. So I would also say here, let's make some people, but we have to make a system first, right?
Well, I think a good idea would be to sort of come up with something that you two want to make characters in. What kind of game are we even talking about? And when I ask that question, usually I tell folks to look at, this big list of genres and ideas that we've got in the game. I think it's Prime settings, I believe the setting stuff is. And I helpfully broke down everything that I could think of. And I said pick 3 and add Cortex to it, which in this case, you could do pick 2. I think it'll be perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. So I'm looking at the pick 3 and add Cortex to it page, which is 128 in the book. And there's a lot of good genre categories here. Now, a running thing lately apparently is I'm really big into magical girls, and Amelia's really big into the necromancy and blood magic sort of stuff.
I think you say lately as if it hasn't been going on for 3 years.
It's been from the beginning, but it's been kind of a pattern lately.
It's been getting worse.
So I'm seeing like magical girls is a subsection of superheroes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And then necromancy, blood magic type stuff would be probably high fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And really, we could throw high school in there at the same time, right? Just to complete the genre, I guess you could say.
Sure.
You might even say it's part of the dark fantasy, actually, because of the whole focus on. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is something like a version of, I don't know, like Death Note, but with more magic in it necessarily, or maybe not in the same modern day setting, right? So you're talking about something with magical girls and necromancy, but when and how is it? So, like, that's the question I'll ask you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I haven't thought about Death Note in forever. Holy cow! Wow, that's a callback.
So what? Superhero dark fantasy high school?
Well, okay, so we did superheroes.
Yeah.
Recently, so we should feel like maybe roll that back.
Roll it back just a little bit.
Just a little less superpowered.
Okay. Right. Like we don't have to go full superpowers, right?
Right.
Because you can. I'm imagining you throw like the superhero genre in there, and it's not like okay, everybody's got superpowers, unless you want it that way, right?
Right. I mean, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s still superheroes, kind of.
That's true.
It's just that everybody who's on the team, mostly of them, are just super spy people.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the big question here, Ryan, is just like, what do you want? Because you can pull in as many other things as you want. I think the question is like, what is the big thing?
Let's just do dark fantasy high school then.
That sounds pretty good. I mean, you can do magical girl stuff because they are literally magical girls.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it has the word fantasy in it. So, I mean, maybe they're just like kind of goth now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be expected, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Optimistic goths. So it'll be fine.
Okay.
You need
dark fantasy high school.
There's got to be that one token character who is not goth and therefore sticks out.
Absolutely.
That'll be Ryan.
I'm sure it will be. All right, cool. Dark fantasy high school. I love that a lot. So what's the next thing that we have to take care of now that we selected kind of our overall genres? What do we have to do to solidify it?
Well, the next thing that you do is you try to pick at least two prime sets. And much like how we try and pick, one or two or more concepts to be the sort of the genres of this mashup, we also want to pick out what the two core trait sets that you have in the game, whether it's skills and attributes or powers and relationships or anything like that form the basis of every dice pool that you put together. So anything you do, whether it's a test or a contest or anything else, is going to involve you taking a die from one prime set and a die from another prime set and adding together in a pool and rolling them. And that kind of makes a huge difference to your game because your focus on which trait sets you want to use at the big list we've got will also then determine kind of how the game feels. If it's very skill heavy, it'll feel like a game that has skills. And if it's all about values and relationships, it won't feel like that at all.
Oh, that's really interesting. Because I think it feels like powers is kind of defined both of the things we're looking at
like
there, right?
magic Right.
Yeah, magic and
Being the powers, I assume.
Yeah, magic transformations and magic abilities and stuff like that. So I think powers would be really interesting. But then if you want to add like some real good magical girl stuff on top of that, like relationships would be really interesting, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, just knowing us, relationships has to be one of them. Like, that's...
Yeah.
I don't really care what else. Relationships has to be one of them.
Yeah, so I think powers and relationships would be really interesting to kind of roll with.
Yeah. I would also suggest something, and that is to consider the idea of having powers be something that is a prime set, but not the only other one. Like, the reason I'm bringing that up is because if there's an occasion when you can't think of a power you have that would apply to a situation, you're stuck a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can always think of a relationship because, you know, am I doing this for this person? Am I doing this against this person? Yeah. And that's where you start having that issue.
Because, like, one of the big tropes of magical girls is you don't have powers half the time. Like, you can't have your powers until you transform, basically.
Right.
I wonder if, like, attributes and relationships would make sense for those, like, times when the powers don't apply.
Yeah. I would also look at things like affiliations, which is often, that's about, you know, what kind of situation am I in that I do better at and the ones that I don't do well at. And affiliations come from Marvel Heroic, where I first had them used, where there was solo, buddy, and team. And so when you were if you were by yourself, you'd use your solo die. If you were within a team, you'd use your team die. And if you had one friend, it was the buddy die. And there's other ways you could look at this too. You could do it in terms of, we've done one recently where we had court, the dungeon, the wild, and so forth as like place sort of types. And every time you were there, you would use the die that was most, because you were affiliated with that specific kind of thing.
Yeah. That's really interesting. The
other option is you could use values, and one I've never really done anything with before, but I've always wanted to, is using the 7 deadly sins as your values, and you could rate them in that way. So that you'd have, and this is in the actual rulebook on page 60, it's got envy, gluttony, greed, lust, pride, sloth, and wrath, and you would have ratings in those. And then you decide from dice pool to dice pool, am I being motivated here by being mad at them, or am I being motivated by my envy? And
okay, so I want to do that because I was re-listening to our Sentinel Comics episode, Ryan, and you were talking about like your infernal powers and stuff. And I was like, I want a magical girl team that is the 7 deadly sins.
Ooh.
So like, I think that we should do that.
That sounds really cool, actually. Yeah, let's go ahead with that then.
Let's do it.
So we'll do what? Values and relationships. And powers and relationships.
And powers as well, yeah.
Yeah, with powers kind of as a side set.
You could even do, and this is just throwing this out there, every single Cortex game does have distinctions as well. Distinctions is one that's kind of automatic because you have 3 of those and they're all rated at D8. But they also provide the elevator pitch for your character.
Oh.
In a little bit like, you know, what are the 3 things about my character that if I told you what they were, you'd know pretty much all about me. So, you know, if you're looking at someone, if you told someone, I am a, what's a good example? Like the Scarlet Witch from the MCU. She could say, I'm, you know, a war survivor. I am a student of chaos, and I am what else? I'm trying to think of something else that I used to have her as my basis for everything, and now I've forgotten it. But you may find this familiar if you played a lot of Fate. They seem similar to aspects. The difference,
it definitely sounds that way, right?
The difference is that you in this game they don't do the same thing necessarily. They can be used as a D4 instead of a D8, and you get a plot point for doing it, which is kind of the equivalent of a compel, but it's self-created. So I would say that in this case, you can also provide the idea of each of these three distinctions comes into a certain kind of category. So, like for Hammerheads, we have one which is what was my life before, what is my personality trait, and what is my approach to doing things, and you can use those as sort of inspiration for coming up with what you do.
Okay.
So I think in this case you could say, okay, well, if we're going to use distinction, then it's Magical Girl, Dark Fantasy High School. One is, what was my family like? What's the distinction based about my family and where I came from? Because it could be very different from character to character. One might be, how do I, go about doing things at school and in life? And the third one could be, what is my magical specialty / quirk? And you could then use that as the basis for power stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that working very well.
So where am I from? What's my approach to things? And then what is the source of my power?
Okay.
I wrote them all down already. If you're thinking it through, Ryan,
Cool.
I made notes.
I've got notes too, so
Okay.
we're good to go.
All right.
All right. All right. I just wanted to make a note of the values of 7 deadly sins. That sounds cool. Okay. So we've got some more building blocks put into it. What is next?
Well, now we have to figure out if there's anything specific rules-wise that you'd like to have featured in the game outside of characters. So the usual way of doing this is, by default, we would take it so that the game includes tests and contests as the way we resolve most things. You can change it to a more traditional action and reaction way of doing it, which I think is sometimes useful for people playing a lot more of the, techno thriller, sort of more procedural kind of thing where they don't really want to be as loosey-goosey. But I think in this case, we'll stick with the tests and contests. It makes the most sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Then, I don't know, there's not a lot of other things we want to worry about at this point. I think you want to consider what is it that people do in this game? What is it that they do? What's the game about?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I feel like that's on you. This is your genre, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Magical Girl genre is all about surviving high school and relationships with friends while also trying to save the world. And usually you're saving the world outside of the eye of society, right? So like all this weird stuff is happening to society. Nobody really acknowledges it after the fact.
Right. It just goes back to normal. Like
Everything goes back to normal. Nobody talks about it. But then, the next big bad comes along and you have to save the day again. Or there's there's a new candy shop that showed up and suddenly everybody's life force is drained because they went to the candy shop that was owned by these bad guys that are draining their energy for nefarious purposes.
Hate when that happens.
I know. Sugar. It will get you every time. So yeah, I like balancing the mundane and the heroic.
Yeah.
Is probably a big goal. And then also utilizing those relationships in order to strengthen your resolve when fighting the enemy effectively,
awesome.
Right?
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that like those enemies need to be able to be like larger than life kind of.
Yeah.
Like, not so much just like,
potentially world ending type enemies.
Right.
Yeah.
Every time.
And usually a hierarchy, right? So there's like one big bad that really could take care of everything if they wanted to, but they always send their little minions to go first, and the minions always mess up because they're not strong enough. And then eventually the big bad steps in.
Right. Eventually there's a season finale, and then
and then there's a big fight. So yeah.
Right.
I think I know a good way of handling that, and that would be if you use the Doom pool in this game, and you used it to reflect the growing sense of dread and worry and concern that's building up. and that gets used in place of difficulty rolls for the GM. They roll the doom pool whenever anyone's doing a test, and the bigger the doom pool gets, it ends up having a bunch of dice in it, and you roll that as a pool of dice. And the bigger the doom pool gets, the more things get troubling for your heroes and characters.
I love that.
The GM can spend dice out of the doom pool to summon, basically, or activate game moderator characters, which would in this case be minions and things. So
nice.
I think the GM could feel like, okay, well, once the doom pool is big enough, I'm going to start throwing things at the players and using it. And at the very end, it obviously will manifest itself as whatever big bad you want it to be.
That sounds
I love
perfect.
that. That's perfect for what we need here.
Absolutely.
I like that we're just saying things to you and you're like, okay, let's make that into a game. We'll just say nonsense and then you can tell us how to make it coherent.
Always good.
Absolutely.
I don't know. So far, it's proof that like this can do anything because we can just make stuff up. I love it. Okay. So
all right.
What else do we need to define?
I think that's probably it for now. Did you want any additional traits that don't necessarily always get used but would be helpful to use? Like one of the ones I often think is helpful is resources and specialties, which is a kind of skill, but only gets used whenever it's appropriate. Those are both fun. The other thing is assets, signature assets. These are things that your character has as part of your who you are and what you do, but they're not innate. They're like a magical staff, or it's a suit of armor, or it's a friend of mine who is always there doing things as a henchman or something. And having those will be fun because then you can split your character creation stage between a few of those. If you want to load up on signature assets, you can have them. Someone else might load up on specialties instead, because they kind of can be used in a similar fashion, only, different ways.
I mean, I kind of like the concept because I know, Ryan, when we did Chimera, there were like a couple of things that you had like moves in the Magical Girl playbooks that were very like, you can only use this like once or twice or whatever.
Yeah.
But really defined the characters. Like I think the Mask playbook really, whatever that one was. Yeah, there's one or two that Senda picked that I was like, oh. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Resources are fun because they're kind of a pool of dice that are spendable, and you use them up until they get refreshed somehow. And you can kind of define them on your own terms. You could say that my resources is like 4d6 of necromantic magic. And whenever I'm using necromantic magic, I can take some of them out and spend them. And if I spend them, the way it works is you can spend as many of them as you want. You roll them all together and you pick the highest one and add it to your actual total. It's not part of your dice pool. It's on top of what you just rolled. So it actually is very potent. But if you roll more than one, you're spending them all and you don't get to keep all of them, right? So it's kind of a risk thing, right? So if you have 46...
I do love a good risk.
Yeah, you might roll just one, knowing you might get a 1, which would be terrible. You might roll 2, hoping to get for one of them to be higher than the other one, and so on. They can also be more than D6s. You could actually have pretty powerful resources if you had a long-term game. And that way you could have, master... this is my last year at Dark Fantasy High School, and I've got D10s in my necromantic power, so watch out.
Yep.
Yeah, I do really like that. I like the idea of like a resource that, I mean, I guess like is technically renewable, but like, can sort of dwindle down, especially in relation to like dark magic or something, which tends to be like somewhat draining.
Yeah, it's very good for both genres where like the dark magic is draining, and then the magical girl stuff is like getting extra oomph because you're pulling inspiration from your allies or whatever, right?
But also like the idea too that you are, like you can only spend so much time doing magical girl things because you have to go back home and do your homework, right? Like you can't just forever do this thing.
And actually, I just thought of this idea that you have to spend time in the mundane world to refresh your magical powers. Would be a really cool way of doing it. So
Yeah.
That would be.
yeah. And you have to play out a couple scenes of ordinary life in order for it to charge up.
All
I
right.
like that a lot.
Yep. Let's do that.
Cool. I think we've got everything you need to make some terribly grief-stricken young people.
Absolutely. Let's see. Well, then now I can say it, right? Shall we make some people?
Let's make some people.
Let's make some people.
Let's make some people.
All right. So now we've got this wonderful base of a game here. What do we need to do first to make our people?
Do I need dice for character creation?
No,
for
you
this one?
don't. Unless
Okay,
you
good.
want to just roll them and annoy people.
No, I put them away. I cleaned off everything, and then I sat down and was like, dice, shoot.
There are 3 forms of character creation described in the book, and they're only examples of how to do it. There's infinite ways you could decide to make characters because your game may want to be spend points to make this, or play through a sort of a pre-game kind of pathways sort of setup. Or even just, I want to take an archetype like a playbook and spend a couple points and then make it mine. In this example, I don't think we have a pathways setup made because we've just made this up now. And we don't have archetypes. So I'm going to suggest that we just go straight to a scratch built method, which is pretty easy.
Yeah, might as well.
So, with that in mind, if you want to look at what we decided on as our prime traits, we went with values, relationships, and distinctions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to maybe put resources in there.
Yep. We got a smattering of powers, possibly.
Yep. Because to be honest, I think the resources might do the trick for powers. Because
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think
could-
we can spend those to do powers.
Be a lot more narrative about it too if you want to. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So first of all, if you're going to have values, you assign dice to them. And these values are the 7 deadly sins.
Mm.
So I'll read them out again for those of you who want to know what they are. So envy, gluttony, greed, lust, pride, sloth, and wrath.
Awesome.
So with values, you're going to have D8s and 3 of them,
Okay.
and D6 for the rest.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
And you can step values up by stepping others down. You can do that once.
Oh,
So you could step one of the 8s up to a 10 by stepping one of the 6s down to a 4, or you could save them as 8, 8, 8, 6, 6, 6, 6.
okay. And I guess it's worth noting, Cam, feel free to create a character with us. Because it'd be awesome to have a team of 3 doing this.
I would do that. However, my brain right now is focused on trying to figure this out. And I can certainly talk about a character who I could make up later if you really felt like it. And that would be good.
Oh, sure.
Okay, Ryan, what are you gonna put your D8s in?
Oh, goodness.
It might
It's
help
a-
first if you decided who your character's going to be before we even went any further, though, right? What kind of character are you thinking about?
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I have to be kind of the optimistic one, right?
Well, right. That's why I'm wondering where you're gonna put this stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, because I'm
And-
very comfortable with like wrath, envy, pride. Like,
I mean, that's very fitting for you, right?
but I'm okay like moving
Mm-hmm.
other things too,
Mm-hmm.
if you wanna.
So I'm thinking like because like you think of the 7 deadly sins, right? And you think like I guess the worst quote unquote traits of humanity, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
The
Which
things
is why
that-
you're having a really difficult time here.
yeah, exactly. But
I'm like, I can tell
of-
you my top 3, no problem. And Ryan's like, yeah, but what if like we weren't that bad? Maybe
No,
we
like
were like
the-
nice people, but
I'm trying to think of like what an optimist would throw themselves into, like of kind of like a driven sort of force. So maybe greed might be one of them.
I think greed, pride. I think you could do gluttony pretty easily because you could I think of gluttony and I also think of like hedonism and
And sloth is apathy and laziness. And so, if they're an optimist, but they don't seem to care that much about, the world because they think it's all fine, being a little bit of a sort of rose-colored glasses individual is, I would say sloth would fit into there too.
That makes sense.
I mean, also you could just be like apathetic about being evil.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very fair.
Ryan's like, that's me.
Yeah, we'll put it in sloth. That's fine. And if we step one down, we can step a D6 to a D4?
Correct.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
And that would be good because in that sense, what that means for a value is I'm really not into this. Whereas a D10 is I'm all over this thing.
Right.
And a D8 is this is definitely on my radar.
Okay.
So I think that's where you look at it in terms of, am I going to find myself more motivated by this thing than this other thing? And if it's a D4, it's like, this is never going to really motivate me at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason you still have it in the game is because you may find yourself in a situation where it makes the most sense for that to be the reason why you would do something, but you just aren't into it.
Okay. That makes sense. I'm stuck between pushing Wrath up to a D8 or pushing one of my others to a D10 and then stepping down Envy to a D4.
What are your other three again, the D8s that you already had?
Greed, Pride, and Sloth.
Mm-hmm. I'm fascinated by a character who has a D10 in Sloth.
I think I can picture that. Okay. Yeah, we'll go with that. D10 and Sloth. Because why not? I could just see this person being like, everything's going to work out fine. It's just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
All right, I put a D8 in Lust, in Wrath, and Pride.
Lovely. You'd be the greatest person to have around you at school.
Mm-hmm.
Call to action.
Yeah, like that. I honestly don't know exactly where this episode leaves off, but I do know that this series goes some really great places, and I can't wait to hear the rest of it. Cortex Prime is a fascinating system/toolkit, and we really just scratched the surface of what it can do here. If you want to hear it played, you can always check out the Courier's Call podcast here on the One Shot Network. It is a family-friendly show, and they just switched to using Cortex Prime for their second season. A reminder that September is International Podcast Month. You can find more info at internationalpodcastmonth.com or on their Twitter at PodMonth. Once again, a sincere thank you to all of you for being patient with us this week and for the next few weeks. We absolutely would not love making this show nearly as much as we do without everyone listening and without the excellent and supportive interactions that we have with all of you. You absolutely make it worth it. So thank you. We love you. Stay safe, drink water, please get vaccinated if you can, and we will see you next week. Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this character creation series. We'll be back in part 2, picking up right where we left off.
Character Creation Cast is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts, this show, and even our press kit. Character Creation Cast can also be found on Twitter at CreationCast or on our Discord server at discord.charactercreationcast.com. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Bolter, and I can be found on Twitter at Lord Neptune or online at lordneptune.com. Our other host, Amelia Antrim, can be found on Twitter at Ginger Reckoning. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license or with permission from the podcast they originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. Our main theme music is Hero Remix by Steve Combs and is used with a Creative Commons license. This podcast is owned by us under Creative Commons. This episode was edited by Ryan Bolter. Further information for the game systems used and today's guests can be found in the show notes. If you'd like to leave us a rating or review, we have links to various review platforms out there, including Apple Podcasts, in our show notes. Also, check the show notes for links to our other projects. Thanks for joining us, and remember, we find that the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We will see you next time.
Now we gotta read some show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Character Creation Cast is hosted by the One Shot Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, visit oneshotpodcast.com, where you will find other great shows like All My Fantasy Children.
Each week, Aaron Catano-Saez and Jeff Stormer take a listener-submitted prompt and, using some of their favorite tabletop RPGs, create an original fantasy character. Along the way, they share laughs, stories, verbal hugs, and populate a shared universe, one story at a time.